This conference will now be recorded.
All right, so we're going to call the planning board meeting to order for March 1st, 2022. So the first order of business would be to approve tonight's agenda. Would like to make a motion to do so.
I'll make the motion.
Okay. So, Mike?
Yes.
Accept the agenda, Julie, Georgia, and I accept the agenda. Okay, next order of business is to approve the minutes for our last meeting, which was October 26th, 2021. And barring a couple of small spelling corrections, I'm fine, I think we should approve them, but would like to make the motion to approve them. Spelling corrections basically being my last name is incorrect.
What was the date of the last meeting?
It is 10/26/2021.
I'll make the motion to accept them.
I'll second that motion.
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Julie?
Yes.
Georgia? And I, we're all yeses. So the minutes are accepted. We'll make a couple of small spelling changes that need to be made. So. So tonight we're here to discuss the INH housing project. They are looking for a site plan review. They are looking for a variance recommendation to the zoning board for off-street parking. They're looking for a variance recommendation for development of a parking lot. And they are looking for a recommendation to the zoning board for the floodplain special use permit.
I have a question. When Georgia came on, we said in conversations that we had that we would have a meeting just to familiarize her with this project before she had to vote. Did you have that opportunity?
I did not have a meeting set up, however, I do have all the information to review. I've had opportunity to look through.
So you feel like you know enough to be able to make decisions?
Oh, I think so.
Okay, now I just wanted to make sure
Yeah,
you don't
thank you.
feel caught like. you're not ready.
Yeah, I had actually, we just had that discussion outside as well.
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
And we're going to have a period where we can ask our final questions, and she has the opportunity to ask any
Okay,
questions that she
good.
may have. So, okay. So does anybody have any questions for our representatives from INH Housing?
I do. So, based on the comments on that, it's not the creek that you have to model, it's the river. What was your follow-up on that and what's been done?
We did reach out. Dave Herrick, as you know, and we did. We got hold of Susquehanna River Basin Commission and entertained the HECRAS model. And we were told, I think as you understood, that since Owego Creek didn't have an effective model to work with, then we would work with we did. And it was quite convenient that there's one section, section X, that shows up on the firm maps. Because we're right through our site. And it shows up in the HECRAS section model. And so we were able to superimpose the foundation.
Where does it cut through exactly?
It cuts right through, and actually, Owen, I think you have a couple of copies that we have. we can certainly pass them around here and share. But, yeah, it's a section that is used for the Susquehanna River cataract modeling. And I think on the backside, it will show where the section goes through.
The second page shows.
The second page shows where the section is on the river. And the input that we received from the Susquehanna River Commission had indicated that if you superimpose the proposed foundation, we're using a multi-family foundation as the inset, given the scale and size of it. So we put that in the model, and then we did run the model, and the model acknowledged that there was a very small tweak. It amounts to less than a tenth of an inch.
Of rise?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was, and so can you show me on there where the model went through? Because I can't tell looking at this. I mean, can you pinpoint it right through there?
Well, that's right through the corner of Liberty and Temple, and then it runs off kind of the northerly direction.
It's just, this is a really, like,
Yeah, but it's the red line there.
right, it's just, I can't see this. The corner of Liberty and Temple looks. Okay, I'm just struggling to read this little sheet of paper. So that is the corner of Liberty and Temple on there. So it looks like it's going out of 45.
It is, it kind of comes right in the northeasterly direction of the site.
So what did it say about, or is it a different study to see if there are going to be velocities? Does that give you velocity
Well,
information?
it does, but what we understand and learned is that there's no effective flow in this area because this is under that backwater effect that we spent a lot of time talking about. So you get the rise in the water, and certainly there's some movement in the water, right? And anybody
Yeah.
walking around out here probably felt it that day. But what the modeling does show is since there's no effective flow through that area, that it doesn't create any.
It's going to just.
It's just gonna go up and it's gonna go down, yeah, with the tailwater condition at the river and Owego Creek.
So can we see the result of that?
Yeah, it's on the first page.
Is there a little verbiage that came with that? Is there a report?
No, there's no report. No. No.
I mean, could a summary written report be generated to just be able to,
Sure, we certainly could.
to just, because, it would be nice to have the interpretation.
But you can see how the foundation at the site was superimposed into the cross section of section X. And when we ran the hydraulic model against that foundation location, it indicated there was really no change. And it doesn't make sense. And coupled with the fact that we've got this whole building flood damage for everything that's kind of spilling into it and out of it as the water goes up and down.
Okay, well, that's good. I'm glad that was done. Yeah, good. Okay.
Any other questions? I have a question on the parking.
Okay.
You stated that one space is allotted for every apartment.
Correct.
How can you rationalize that when you stop and think that people are probably going to have home carriage in there? Some people are not going to leave during the day, so their spot's going to be taken. They're going to have visitors. Uncle Billy's going to come and stay the weekend. Where's he going to park his car? I'm not seeing where the parking is going to be adequate.
Okay. Lynn, do you want
Yeah.
to address that?
So INHS has actually an internal model that we use based on all properties that we own in our portfolio that calculates, that does a predicted number of parking spaces that will be needed based on the size of the unit, and the income levels of the units. And excuse me, in our portfolio, the number of people at those income levels in those unit sizes who have owned cars since 2014. So we modeled this using, there's a couple of variables which depend on the location relative to services, grocery stores, things like that. Because I'm not very familiar with Owego, I know that it's a walkable location to most things, but I used a very conservative, I used our highest transportation factor, assuming that it would be a high level of car ownership. I don't know if that's true or not, it may be lower. But using that highest transportation factor, we're predicting 38 vehicles owned. I can leave this with you if you'd like. It has, actually that's not the correct title, but it's the correct number of units. This is the unit mix and the unit income levels, size of units. And this is the predicted number of vehicles for each unit at those income levels. So with that, sort of conservative transportation factor, we get 38 vehicles. If we use somewhat less conservative transportation factor of 0.9, we would get 23 vehicles. So I think that in the conservative one, we still are showing an excess in a number of vehicles. Sure thing.
And I think it's also fair to acknowledge that there will be some free parking. There's obviously been, the vacancy of some parking in some of the buildings that have been vacated, but it's only one side on Temple, but there will be some spaces there that will be available to visitors as well.
So where's the exit of the parking lot? And where's the road in the back?
Liberty or Temple?
So where do I get out? I just wasn't,
There's only one way to get in and out.
that is the only way in. Okay, I just wanted to I didn't know if there was
And then on the west side, we use for the townhouse east side.
So if there's something happened to that entrance, an exit, an emergency vehicle could not get in there.
Well, yeah, sure. It depends on.
Thinking from an emergency services perspective, we're not going to be going into the parking lot, we're going to be pulling in front and going in the front entrances.
It's 24 foot wide. It's the conventional curb cut width, so.
Now, you mentioned something about parking on Temple.
Yes.
Now, I just recently drove down that way, and there's no parking signs all along that area, Temple Street, on that side of the street.
On the south side.
Yep, on the same side that you're gonna put the buildings.
Oh, I thought it was on the south side. Is it south side or north side? One of the sides, cool. One of the sides has no parking and the other one does.
The side where you're gonna put the buildings, there's no parking signs all along.
So then they have to park from the main wall to the building.
Right.
But
And that's, if you allow parking in front of that building, it's gonna cause a traffic problem. It's gonna cause a problem for emergency vehicles to get down that street.
If it's already no parking, the village board would have to change the parking on the street. It's not anything that's parking.
But it's not no parking on both sides.
No, only on the one side. It's a
Right.
narrow street.
Right.
For people to get down.
Some people do currently park there. Had been used for parking in the past, so.
with respect to parking, the biggest issue I have is the size of the space. Because if you look at, this is my quick analysis. And if you say an average car is like 6.5 feet wide, if you have a 10-foot wide space, you have 3.5 feet between vehicles. If you have a 9-foot wide space, you only have 2.5 feet between cars. That's not a lot. That's tight.
Well, actually,
I mean-
it should wind up being 4 feet if you're talking about 2 spaces.
No, it's 1.5, 1.75, I've already counted. Because it's a 10-foot spot, if you have a 6.5-foot car, then you have 1.75 feet and 1.75 feet, 1.75 and 1.75 is 3.5.
Right, but if you have 2 different spaces, then you're saying that you
No,
have.
I've already, if I have a 10-foot wide space.
Right.
In a 6.5-foot car. So I have 1.75 feet on each side of the car. The other 1.75 feet I get from the adjoining space.
Right,
So I have 3.5 feet.
which is
But
enough
if-
to open a car door and get in and out.
but they're gonna have 2.5 feet. That's not a lot. A 10-foot wide space gets you 3.5 feet. A 9-foot wide space is gonna give you 2.5 feet. 2.5 feet, number one, to maneuver in and out of, it's like parking at Cornell. Does anybody work at Cornell and try to park in the parking garage at Cornell? Those spaces are narrow and it's really a pain in the butt. And so a 2.5 foot wide space between cars for maneuvering and for getting in and out, that's a pretty uncomfortable parking spot. And that doesn't include people who drive big trucks and big SUVs, which a lot of people drive. So with respect to parking, that's honestly, to me, the biggest issue that I have is they're really small. It's a really small parking space, and there's just no way around that. It just is. So, I mean, I think that 200 square feet for a parking space as a zoning guideline is a pretty reasonable guideline. That there's a reason why the parking space is that big. So, I mean, it's 20% smaller, but it's a huge impact. That 20% is a lot. That foot is a lot when you're trying to get in and out of a car. So I think that's just something that needs to be considered.
What were the income levels again that you were dealing with?
35,000 to 60,000.
You said, I'm sorry, 35,000, 55,000.
35,000 to 60,000 if the income level that we're being considered.
And you're still looking at 50.5 feet on the building for height?
Yeah, the elevations are still the same. Yep, 50 and, I'll call it 50.5, yeah, and that's to the highest peak.
Highest peak.
Yeah. And we have, obviously, we've got better part 4 feet just to get to the first floor. Setting a floor elevation of 3.67 feet above the base flood elevation.
And that's a ramp over there? Is that a ramp?
This
Yeah.
is the port, I'll call it a porch, if you will. It's on the front side of the Liberty Street side of the building. And the ramp is, there's actually a lift. So at the main entrance for the multifamily building, we have a lift next to the under building bike storage.
Oh, so there isn't a ramp, there's a,
That's right. Yeah. So actually, we got lifts on each of the,
every building has, so buildings don't have ramps, they're lit.
yeah.
And that's pretty quick. It's like a few seconds to get up there.
Yes.
That's
You get in,
efficient.
you get in, you put the feet around.
Okay.
I think this was asked before, but I'm gonna ask it again. If you can't fill these apartments with people in this income range, you're gonna be taking HUD and DSS and
Lindsay, you want to?
Well, it's not legal for us to discriminate on the basis of the source of income. If people income qualify for the units, we can't say, oh, you're getting your income from X source or whatever. Their income might be from employment, it might be from someone who's on social security.
let me rephrase my question. If you can't fill it with people that meet these income requirements, are you going to rent it out to people under those income requirements?
We have to fill it with people who meet those income requirements. We're legally required to meet those income requirements. People have There's calculation for the maximum amount of their own income that they can pay and be able to live in the apartment. And then there's an upper limit above which they cannot earn and be able to live in the apartment legally under the regulations. So there's a kind of a small band of people that will qualify for each of those units at those income levels, but we cannot rent outside of that band.
And that's if two people, like if one person is on the lease, but then somebody else moves in who also has a job, how does that work?
It's the household income.
So everybody.
Yep.
So if two people have $32,000 jobs, they don't qualify.
And how often are you checking on the incomes?
There's an annual recertification that's required. They have to be certified at move-in and then annually.
Are they gonna be required to notify you if they move somebody else in?
Oh, yes, that would be a lease violation if they move someone in without notifying us. That person has to be, if it's an adult, has to be on the lease.
Well, you wouldn't check the income until the year.
Well, no, if there's a change to the household size, we would verify the income at that point too. It's just routinely annually done, even if there's no change to the household size, because someone, someone's income could go up or down depending on their particular circumstance.
And it was 35 to 55 or 35 to 60?
35 to 60.
Yeah, but that's based on, it's a little bit more complicated calculation than that. That's a general rule of thumb sort of range that we're giving you.
I'm still stuck on the parking things. You get people in the $60,000 income range, they're gonna have two vehicles. They're not gonna have one vehicle,
Well,
especially if they're both working.
this is a question that comes up a lot at our projects when we haven't developed, especially if we're new in the community. And all I can tell you is that this parking predictor has been quite accurate over the years. It's not precise, obviously. It's, we don't know exactly who's going to be living there, but it has proven to be quite accurate in predicting, the general number of the basically required.
And where are those facilities that you've estimated?
Well, most of our properties are in and around Ithaca, but we do have property up in Tyre, the town of Tyre in Seneca County, and we have places over in Watkins Glen now in Schuyler County.
So how are the numbers in Tyre for parking and for people? Because downtown Ithaca, there's a lot more. You have TCAT. There's no TCAT here, right? I mean, that's a very big. So if you look at Watkins and you look at Tyre.
Yep. So Pine Utica, we have 48 units. There are 65 parking spaces. There are 38 tenants who have cars. That in Tyre, where there is no public transportation in Tyre either. Yeah.
And then Watkins.
Watkins is,
Where there's more around.
see, there's actually, there's a bus stop right in front of the building at Watkins.
Yeah.
I actually don't have that one on here. I have some other buildings in Watkins Glen, but they aren't ones that we own. So the Watkins Glen School Apartments has 61 units and 40 tenants with cars. The Glen Valley Apartments has 32 units and 24 tenants with cars. Jefferson Village Apartments, which is the Housing Authority's existing property, 48 units and 10 tenants with cars.
When you say tenants with cars, does that mean individuals residing there each having a car, or is that by household?
It's the total number of cars. So it could be, a couple and they have one car. It could be a couple and they have two cars, but that's the total number of vehicles.
Vehicles registered to the building, you can't
Correct.
clear how many apartments that are actually.
Correct. Yes.
Any other questions?
I mean, just a general comment, not a question, is I still can't, I struggle tremendously that this is the first part of it. And why we're putting housing in the first part of the village that floods is kind of honestly beyond me. And I mean, I don't know if anybody read the IPCC report that just came out or heard about it, about how woefully unprepared we are infrastructurally for climate change. But all of these other houses have been here for 100 years. They've been here. They were here before climate change. They were here before we knew. Now we're knowingly, and this like so smacks of climate injustice, we're taking low income and disabled people and putting them in the first part of this village that's floods. And I'm really at a wellness of like how you're supposed to take care of people. I'm just saying, I'm really struggling because we all know what happens in the aftermath of a flood and how much emotional baggage there is. And I really wonder what's going to happen with this drainage system after that fills up and cars are going to flood. And I mean, the parking is 8 feet lower than base flood elevation.
So I guess my question to you would be, so then do we force everybody who lives there to move out now because they're in a flood?
Well, no, they live there.
I mean, like you're saying,
No,
it's
but
dangerous
this
to them.
is building new. The point is, those buildings are all there. They're existing, they've been there a long time.
And they're not built to let the water flow under them. They're built so that their houses flood.
No, but they need to be, the whole point is, we need to, as a community, I am working hard to try to get people to embrace mitigating their buildings and, I mean, and living responsibly with the things that are there. I have no objection in principle to this project, but putting it there just doesn't make any sense to me. Other locations could make tremendous sense, but it just seems environmental justice irresponsible to me.
So what you're saying is that no matter how hard any developer works to make it as flood friendly as possible, you don't think that we should develop this village?
I don't think you should develop this site. This site is the lowest spot in the village. I'm not saying the entire village, but this is literally the first part of the village that floods. I printed out all the maps. I can show them to you. It is the first spot. Major flooding begins right here. It is the lowest.
Because it's going to flood from the river out. That makes sense.
Well, no, it's because it's the lowest part of the village. I mean, when you have major flooding, all of the part along the river
It's going
is
to flood.
dry. No, this is all dry. This is wet because it's lower. Everything, you know, much of along the river is all dry. This is the whole. It's, I don't understand why that makes sense. I don't know. It's way before my time how this site was picked. But
Well, I can comment on that. So the site actually came to us from the land bank. The land bank had been acquiring properties that had been damaged in the flood,
in the flood, yeah.
poor quality housing that had been damaged in the flood. And so those lots were assembled by the land bank, and they were looking for a developer to redevelop that site in a way that would respond to the location of being in the floodplain. So that's the genesis of the project, really.
Yeah, and so, and I mean, it's so many people, so many people stuck right in the most flooding part of the village. It's not even like before, it was, 5 or 6 houses worth of people. Now it's a ton of people. So, yeah, I struggled on, I thank you for explaining that. I mean, it makes sense, but I didn't know that story. So,
Hi, this is Rob Simonetti. Can I speak? Rob Simonetti from SWR.
It's a record.
Yes.
WBR.
Go ahead,
Um,
Rob.
I understand the question of sort of the social justice or equity of this question of putting people here, but I could also look at it that we are developing 45 safe, flood-proof, dignified housing units for people who are already in your community living in flood-prone houses like the ones across the street. So we're taking 45 of your residents and putting them into safe housing.
My understanding was that this was also to bring people into the community, not just for the current residents.
Yeah, understood. But we could have many of those people coming directly from your community living in the.
But my biggest issue with it is the height of the building.
yeah, that's
And
it.
I don't think it's conducive to the neighborhood.
No.
At all.
But again, it does meet the zoning requirements.
But it doesn't meet the character of the, right? It doesn't meet it's an emphasized building in Owego, right? So there's no comparable building to this in the entire village that's 50 feet tall. That takes up a block in a residential neighborhood. So,
And I understand that everybody would like to build a single family house and make it look perfect. But that's also not feasible in this village.
Don't get me
No
wrong.
developer is going to come in and do that because it's not cost effective.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we don't need these apartments.
We do.
I'm just saying this is not the location for these apartments. There are other locations in the village that were not flooded that would be perfect for this.
Are they available to be purchased at a reasonable cost for the developer to do?
Now, don't go reasonable cost.
No, because that's
No,
part of
because
it.
one of those properties, there are 3 of those properties that were bought. They paid $112,000 for 3 properties that weren't worth $12,000.
I think that was
Together.
$120,000 of property. Was the
That's not a reasonable cost. So you got the whole section of South Depot Street over there that's run down, didn't flood. It could be purchased and you could put the building over there. It wouldn't have to be 50 feet high.
But we also, as an agency, cannot tell a developer, we're not going to approve your property because we don't like where you put it here, and then we'll approve it.
And I'm not saying that either.
But that's what it sounds like you're saying. You're saying, I don't like it for here, but if you would put it someplace that I like it, I'll approve it.
No, what I'm saying is,
No, I think he's
We
saying
need
we're
it.
a more suitable.
we need it, but this is not the suitable place to put it. It needs to be in a location that's not going to flood.
So one of the
And there
variants,
are available locations.
one of the variance procedure things for the appeals board, I'm in section 117.19 of the code that says, for building in a floodplain, it says the availability of alternative locations for the proposed use which are not subject to flooding or erosion damage. So has that been exhausted? Can we say there's no place that you could put this that's not susceptible to flooding or erosion damage? Because this site is 100% susceptible to flooding.
And that's the, there's special flood, the flood damage prevention.
Yes.
That's the variances from the flood damage prevention. Is this project in need of a variance from the flood damage prevention? Right, so I certainly recognize for that, that's not what's before the zoning board review. They're not asking for a variance, what they would law. So those variance criteria don't apply. Now, that being said, in the site plan review, certainly one of the criteria that the planning board needs to review and determine is whether there's exists a harmonious relationship between proposed uses and existing adjacent uses, which goes beyond, simply saying if the zoning code allows it, then we can let it happen. We do have to consider what's neighboring to a parcel to harmonious to that certain sense.
So it's neighboring North Ave, it's neighboring the firehouse, which are all follow as well.
And that's, you as a board don't have to agree with each other. At the end of the day, it'll be a vote of whatever to whatever. There's going to be a minority. Minority is certainly entitled to have to reach a different conclusion. That's okay.
Question, does this infringe any on the other residents of the area that's quiet adjoining the property?
Not in the sense of using the phrase quiet. Now, if those neighbors object to this project, then they've been standing to bring a lawsuit challenge towards action. But in the sense of good quiet enjoyment, things like that, not like a landlord.
So there is a possibility of a lawsuit.
So, yeah.
Would it class action? No, individual?
Yeah, it would just be, the neighbor, often if there's a zoning plan challenge, a group of people get together. But there needs to be at least one person with what's called standing to bring a lawsuit, which says I've suffered as a result of whatever the action was. Neighbors are, I'm going to say rule of thumb, they always have standing. It's kind of like as you get further and further away from the property, what interest does this person actually have in what just took place? 1,000 feet away.
So matter of perception.
Yeah, courts, these issues have been litigated. Somebody living in the next town over, standing, somebody living on the other side of town, problem standing, somebody living 1,000 feet away. Maybe it's, a good argument to be made. If you're right next door, yeah, you can certainly file a lawsuit and get into court.
This is not really our purview, but the pilot agreement, how is that? The reverse pilot, is it a progressive pilot?
Yeah, so that isn't in the planning board's wheelhouse. We discourage you from even talking about pilots during your meetings because it has zero impact on your review. It's certainly a matter of public interest. but
That was my idea, was public interest.
Yeah, I would suggest bringing that question up outside of this.
Board, okay.
Are there any other questions for the developer? So we need to do a seeker as lead agency on this. Does everybody have a copy of part 2 of the seeker?
I don't know.
I'm sorry, I thought I had extra copies.
What is part two?
Huh? Yeah, we have to do seeker too.
I know it by heart.
I was very surprised if you did, you seemed to. Okay,
No.
Question number 1 on Seeker Part 2. Will the proposed action create a material conflict with an adopted land use plan or zoning regulations?
Can you clarify what that means, a material conflict?
Yeah, so if there's a variance needed in any sort, certainly there's a conflict, and then the question is whether it's material or not. So you would, as a board, need to decide whether the variance request rises for environmental significance purposes to the level of materiality. And so I would propose to you that, for example, variance request for a 1 foot setback parking space isn't really environmentally significant in the grand scheme of what seeker is meant to address. Now, it might be considered justification to otherwise deny an application because you find that extra parking or whatever. I'm just playing both sides here. But for seeker purposes, you might conclude, it doesn't,
It's not the intent of seeker.
right. I mean, seeker's point is to determine the magnitude of potential impacts in the scope, size, the intensity of the impact, the duration of it in relation to the overall project, and then how will that affect the environment as a result of that. So, I mean, you need to look at you need to be thinking when you're answering the question, really, what all variances to begins for. Are there any potential negative impacts as a result of those variances, and then also the project just in general as a whole? And then asking, are they moderate to large or none too small? And then the analysis that can stop there, if it's moderate to large, okay, that's fine. Has the applicant proposed any conditions or features of the project that result to mitigate the potential? This is a potential impact. And they propose things that take that moderate to large impact and say, well, using flood. Well, it could be a moderate to large impact. I can see Julie saying that. In which case, the developer would say, well, but that's why we have all of the flood bending. That's why we are otherwise in compliance with the damage prevention law. We're not seeking a variance from those requirements. Therefore, we believe that, by complying with the flood damage law, we've mitigated the potential impacts, and so you should conclude it's a no or a small impact.
So seeker is not concerned about aesthetics. It's more or less the actual nuts and bolts.
Well, it can be concerned about aesthetics. I mean, one of the questions on there is character of the community.
Right.
And so, you have to ask, okay, what is the community? It's a bunch of people living in buildings and using buildings. What does that look like? Is this going to truly negatively affect the community character as a result of the project? And again, I want to try to distinguish between finding something that you object to, because you might find that that doesn't fit community character for purposes of your site plan review law. That doesn't mean, you might conclude that, but it doesn't mean that for seeker purposes, it truly rises to environmental significance.
How do they define an environment? I mean, like, you can define it, I mean, broadly is just,
Yeah,
right, it doesn't mean it's necessarily ecological environment, it's environment.
yes.
I take it in the context of environment, in the broadest sense. Okay.
Okay, so with regard to question 1, I would say that it's a no or small. Will the proposed action result in a change of the use or intensity of the land? Any discussion on this one?
So how does this work? I mean, this process works. You just made a recommendation for one, but do we have to go through one at a time?
So if anybody feels that any of these questions that they're going through warrant a moderate to large impact, you should say so.
Okay.
and then have the discussion amongst the board as to, okay, why? Why do we think moderate to large? Do we actually think it's moderate to large, or is it actually no small? Or it's only one of us think it's moderate? Because if the majority finds that it's not moderate to large, then the majority is going to ultimately make that decision.
Well, I think 2 is moderate to large. You're going from 14 single-family homes to 45 families in one building.
Yeah.
You're gonna have much more foot traffic, vehicle traffic.
Yeah, and so this is again where I think the idea of what Seeker's point is, right? This is stuff that is really impactful. And so using like as an examples. So Seeker classifies things as either type 1 or type 2 actions, and then anything that's not type 1 or type 2 is an unlisted action. So type 1 actions are the things that are presumed to have the potential for significant environmental impacts. 100 units for dwellings, 100 dwelling units in a place this size, if I remember correctly, is a type 1 action. Like that's something that they're like, oh, we presume that will have a significant environmental impact. So in your case, then it's an increase of 30 some odd units above what is existing. And so, I guess the question to you would be in the grand scheme, remember this is the community, we're thinking of the environment, is an increase of 30 some odd units in the village of Owego significant or not? Is there potential by adding 30 units to result in a moderate or large environmental impact? Or is in the scheme of what we're really thinking of as the environment in this area, or not? So if you look so narrowly at one street, I can see how you view that as potentially moderate or large. But if you look at from a further zoomed out scope, it starts to have potentially less of an impact.
But what about the character? Because there's no building remotely like that. So, it's very out of character.
Yeah, and I guess again.
The smaller buildings won't be. The townhouse, not that we have townhouses, but at least that's a smaller structure. But the big, huge building is, there's no analog for that building anywhere.
Yeah.
So what do you do with that?
Yeah, again, I think ultimately it's going to be the board's decision whether or how to classify the answers, they attempt to answer these questions. And then if in answering these questions, the board determines there is a potential for moderate to large impacts as a result of, let's say, the community character, because we feel that this particular building is just out of community. And there's no mitigating this building, we think. That's, so what do you do then? Oh gosh, for seeker purposes, potentially, which, and then I believe it ends up going back to the applicant to say, well, we need you to do a full environmental impact study. Do the full kit and caboodle to really explore those potential environmental impacts so we can make an even more better decision. Now,
Or they could come back and say, we're going to make the big building smaller.
or they can do that. But, that would be up to the applicant to do.
Right.
But, I think it's a really tough factual decision that you folks have to make whenever it comes to seeker and these potential impacts. I can't tell you what the answer will be.
Right. Understood.
And it's really, but it's, considering, okay, what does our community look like? What is this building? What are the other buildings in the area? I know we've heard from Christina, there's other large buildings in the area. You might not like exactly how this one looks, but there's other large buildings. And so from a size perspective, if you look, to the next street or two over, it's looking less out of character.
There's other large buildings in the area, but there's also a lot of residential homes in that that don't look anything like that.
But then the don't look like the buildings on North Ave either, and they're like,
That's not residential. This
North
is
Ave is not
residential.
residential.
North
This
Ave
is
is
residential.
residential, right out of commercial.
but what I'm saying is it's not out of character for the areas from. Regardless of what it's zoned, it's not out of character for what those other buildings close to it look like.
How tall are the buildings on? How tall are the North Avenue buildings?
Sure.
Can we ask the people if they know the answer to that question? All of the buildings on North Avenue, how tall are
The
they?
3-story buildings.
30 feet tall?
Well, you want to think about the old firehouse?
Well, no, no, all the buildings on North Avenue. When you go up North Avenue, with the exception of Firehouse, everybody's about, how tall are those buildings?
I would dare track one.
30 feet?
They're taller than 30 feet. House, the firehouse is taller than 30 feet.
I said not the firehouse. The firehouse is a firehouse, it's tall, but all of the other North Avenue structures aside from the firehouse. I mean, they're way lower than 50 feet.
They may be lower than 50 feet. I guess what I would say, again, this is Rob Simonetti. You know, those who envision the zoning here and the land use, we're envisioning sort of long-term for the city, which means as old houses come down, new houses will be built that will address the flooding issue like this project is. So this project can be a model for future development, how we raise the building off the site. So although it's more than a 3-story building currently, it's because we've raised it up 6-7 foot off the sidewalk to address the flooding of the city. Not just of this area, but of the whole, you know, every area that floods. Again, this is an opportunity for people to move out of 100-year-old homes that flood, that probably have mold in them, have poor insulation, have weak structures, and to move into a safe environment.
So how many stories of dwellings are there in the big building?
Great.
3. So if there were 2, it would be much more commensurate with the rest of the village.
So I don't want you guys to get bogged down necessarily in too much, you know, I mean, if you're pondering, I'll shut up. But I think the thing that, you know, we need to you folks to do tonight is, you don't have to, but of course, move through seeker.
Right.
And if there appears to be discussion on something like this discussion, which is a good discussion, eventually poll the board as to what the board members individually believe the answer should be to a particular question, and then move on to the next one. Otherwise, we'll keep spinning our wheels.
Okay.
So we were on question 2. Will the proposed action result in a change in the use or intensity of the use of the land?
Actually, we were on 3.
No, we hadn't marked off 2
Oh.
yet.
Okay.
And the basic use of the land doesn't change. It's residential.
Well, the intensity changes, but if you look at that from a whole village perspective, I take your argument.
So then it would be no or small
I'm
impact.
right on that one.
Will the proposed action impair the character or quality of the existing community?
Yeah, I'm moderate to large on that one.
I'm no or small.
I'm an over small.
I gotta go with moderate to large.
I'm not at large.
So then after we get through part 2, the question then is in part 3, you know, what mitigating conditions are already in the project that reduce the potential for impacts of moderate to large to, you know, it's small, or what other types of conditions might the planning board consider proposing or using or conditioning the project on to reduce the moderate to large to a middle or small.
Or will the proposed action have an impact on the environmental characteristics that cause the establishment of the critical environmental area?
Can you elaborate what that means?
So there is no critical environmental area within the village. So this would be a no.
So that's a no. Okay.
Will the proposed action result in an adverse change in the existing level of traffic, affect the existing infrastructure for mass transit, biking, or walkway?
This again is more, I think, of like a capacity question for the village streets, the sidewalks, all transit, that type of thing. There could be 30 more additional units, which could house 30 to 60 people, presumably. Somebody correct me if I'm way off base on that. In the grand scheme of the village of Owego, where there's 3,000 or 4,000 people, that well, I don't want to lead you to too far of a conclusion, but
So I would say no or small, because when you look at it in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, I guess I'm gonna have to agree with that. It's
I
much
agree
smaller.
with the no or small.
So we're not looking at around the block. You can't just look at it in terms of what it does very locally. You have to look in the context of the entire village.
I think that is the correct
That is
way to view this type of thing, because
Okay.
if you get, no matter what you do, right, me sitting here is really environmentally harmful to this chair. You know, but it's like, that's silly, because it's looking too narrowly focused. If you did that for everything, you wouldn't end up doing anything. And it
We're
doesn't
making a
actually-
microcosm out of this,
Right.
instead of expanding it.
Yeah, it's mountains and molehills here, right?
Actually, they done it.
It's, I don't know, it's here pretty well.
Problem your chair is cracked, the whole.
So it may be more of an environmental impact to you than to the chair.
Six, will the proposed action cause an increase in the use of energy and it fails to incorporate reasonable available energy conservation or renewable energy opportunities? That would be number small.
I agree. Small.
Yeah, small. Sorry.
Will the proposed action impact existing public or private water supplies or public or private wastewater treatment utilities?
Has the sewer department weighed in on that?
My understanding is that the sewer department is more than willing to take whatever capacity anybody's willing to add.
With the expansions that they've made to the sewer plants, they can more than.
They can. Okay, I'm just asking.
I mean, I am the commissioner, I can answer that if you like.
Well, I just know I've been to
Yeah.
enough meetings that.
Do you agree?
100%.
Yeah, okay, I'm just asking.
Hmm?
No, I'm sorry, not supposed to speak. Kind of on.
And I know that the public water supply can handle any conditions. So they're both no or small. Will the proposed action impair the character or quality of important historic, archaeological, or architectural or aesthetic resources? So that would be a no or small.
Pick up any Indian heads,
Exactly.
pyramids.
Will the proposed action result in an adverse change to natural resources such as wetlands, water bodies, groundwater, air quality, flora, or fauna? No. Everybody in agreement with that? Will the proposed action result in an increase in the potential for erosion, flooding, or drainage problems?
Drainage problems, we don't really know. In the wake of flood, there's gonna be, if it floods, there's gonna be drainage.
But is it adding to those drainage problems? That, those drainage problems we know already exist. Is this project going to make them worse? And by the design of the project, it should not. That's what that question is
We don't
leading
really
to.
know that for sure, because.
Well, the whole basement is flow through.
I understand that. I'm saying every flood is different. You don't know what's gonna happen. You could get more water that they couldn't handle. You could get less water that they can handle. So you don't really know. You know, every flood's different. I've been here through 72, every flood since 72, and every one of them has been different.
Right, but what I'm
So
saying
you
is the
can't-
design is flow through, so it's not going to add to it. It's gonna go through. Whatever water is there is gonna be there.
So I very much appreciate that this was done. But it would be nice to actually have a report to interpret, this data. This one's a hard one.
So I think Christina's, statement a bit ago that remember, this is in the context of seeker and environmental significance and the magnitude of potential impact. And so understanding what is there and then understanding like how it would work in this project. And then, okay, now this project is there. What are the potential impacts, magnitude as a result of this project being present? Christina's indicated that it's a flow-through system. I believe the information, correct me if I'm wrong, I might be way off base, but I believe there's permeable, they can drain, whatever the drainage is. I know he's like, ooh, I got that look.
So it has vents, and then they also have underground storage capacity for water under the parking lots.
And, right, and so it's
Right.
understanding all that stuff.
So so those are underground, but there's definitely much less permeable surface than there was before, because you have all of the roof, you have all of the blacktop. And I understand that those containers are supposed to accommodate for the fact that you took away a lot of permeable surface in the street. Right, so that's at a storm level.
Please.
Am I allowed to speak?
She's asking.
Yeah. Definitely asking.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that just before
No, she's asking you a question, please answer.
So you are correct. We have increased impervious surfaces and we have provided the mechanism to distribute that into the underlying sands and gravels below the site and to provide storage to negate or mitigate the difference between that change in impervious surface. Yep. That's correct.
So you just have to assume that that system's gonna work and be maintained.
There's a way to
Thank you.
maintain it, and we shared that. We provided the information on how that is going to be done. And I think you can also kind of look to the history of what you've called the low point in the backyard. Through all of the events that you've experienced, where's the water go still? It goes away, it goes down. So yes, we'll have these practices that might be inundated and silty water, but there's a way to clean them, there's a way to flush them, and to restore their original function. So just much in the same way that the existing site seems to survive the inundations and the silty water that keeps continue to go down through the lawn into those gravels, we're replicating that.
If I recall correctly, you say that there's a fabric that goes over that you can pull out and clean.
Yeah, there's, within the materials that we sent, there's a fabric liner It goes around the chamber and also goes on the invert of it. And there's sediments are captured on that sheet. And then that's the surface that can be flushed.
So is there any authority in the village, like, could that be part of code enforcement to make sure that's maintained? How can the village be sure that that's maintained?
So,
Is there,
yeah, I mean, as conditions on the project, and did you propose a maintenance plan?
There has to be, for the scale of the project, there's going to be a long-term maintenance plan. Yeah, the speedies permit requires that. So, and the clearest indicator that something needs to be done is when there's water sitting on the basketball court.
And so as
And
part of,
stays
as part of the speedies permit process, they have to make certain, they have to do certain things. The village board or planning board or zoning board would include as a condition on any approvals that you provide that those controls be maintained. That way you
have to
also
be
have.
inspected once a
Yeah, just
year?
that the maintenance plan be followed and complied with, and then if for whatever reason, whoever, I think it's the DEC that enforces the speedies permit. DEC is choosing to not do anything, you've made this a condition of your local approval, then you can bring a local court action to fine them for failure to maintain those things. And to like the minimum fine or whatever the fine would be, that adds up. And eventually they'll say, we should probably just maintain these instead of continually being brought to court.
So that would be a zoning board action.
No, we could put it in our motion. So we could approve the site plan pending that they get all state, local permits and that they adhere to their maintenance plan to clean their stormwater systems.
Okay.
So again, for 10, I'm at no or small impact. Does everybody agree? Yeah. Will the proposed action create a hazard to environmental resources or human health? No. Okay, so now we need to work through 3.
So just to provide more context to question 3, this is from the seeker workbook. So the question is, again, will the proposed action impair the character or quality of the existing community? So I'm just going to read for you from this because I think it's all very helpful for you folks to hear. Many people define their character of community in very general terms, suburban, rural, urban, quiet, safe, scenic, or friendly are terms often used. Others describe community character only in terms of visual features. Community character is broader than this, however. Community character is defined by all the man-made and natural features of the area. It includes the visual character of a town, village, or city and its visual landscape, but also includes the buildings and structures and their uses, natural environment, activities, town services, and local policies that are in place. Development can cause changes in several community characteristics, including intensity of land use, housing, public services, aesthetic quality, and the balance between residential and commercial uses. So in order to decide if impacts will occur, the reviewing agency should look at the available information and ask, will there be a change to the visual or architectural character of the broader landscape or streetscape, or will it introduce a different sized structure that currently exists? Does it create a change in the nature and intensity of land uses in the area, which then calls back to your answer to part 2, or excuse me, question 2. Will there be a change in the nature of housing in the area, such as changing a single family neighborhood into a multifamily one, or change the affordability of housing? Does it create the need for more public services, such as parks, recreation facilities, police, fire protection? So they talk about most proposed actions will result in some change in community character. There are probably few that will result in no change at all. Examples of actions that may not affect community character are passage of law, not land use, or other discretionary actions. So basically, this understands that almost no matter what we're doing, there will be some potential community character impact. It's then trying to decide what is the magnitude of this type of impact to the community.
So even based on that, I still say it's no or small.
I still say it's moderate to large.
You only say that because of the size of the building though.
I say it's no small, also because I think what's happening is we're seeing our community as, it's always been the historical look that, you know, we've taken pride in. But I disagree that these buildings are gonna change that in the broader scheme of things. I don't, like you were saying, the first part of that you're reading, led me to believe that it was bigger than just that, going back to the narrow, you know, way of looking at things, making, you know, the narrow part of looking at things is to the whole community, the whole community as a whole. I think I mean, historically speaking, our community it's beautiful and the buildings, but they are changing over time. I don't think these looks are gonna damage that for myself. I don't think that I'm gonna see it as being negative. I'm gonna see it more, I see it more as a positive change in the character for my personal. So I'm gonna say it's no, small impact when I look at the larger scheme of things.
And it's just too big for the existing community. It's just gonna be this behemoth building of which there's no remote equal in the village. So to me, I mean, it's easy, just cut one story off of it and would fit much better. So I think in its current incarnation, it's out of character bit.
I think another thing that might stick in on our minds too is, you've raised it, right, so it's flood.
Correct.
I think that's part of it. I think we're seeing that also as maybe adding to the whole character of the building, making it seem larger than what it may be.
Well, it is bigger because of that, and I completely agree that you had to do that. I'm not saying you didn't. have to
And all
do
buildings, and any other buildings in the neighborhood are
I'm not, my house is 1,400. I'm not saying you don't have to do that, but I think the compromise is you don't have to make a 50-foot tall building. You just don't. And it would fit much better in the neighborhood if it weren't a 50-foot tall building. So,
So, Mike, Linda, I know we've heard from Georgia and Christina. Do you folks have any different opinions, different conclusions to this question? You know, and I guess if the answer is moderate to large, then that's okay. We'll move on to the next question, which is, and Julie's already kind of jumped to that. What mitigating conditions could potentially be introduced to reduce that potential moderate to large impacts to a no or small? And she's mentioned take off a story of the building, which would also have the impact likely of reducing the.
right, then you would be able to have the parking so that you don't have to in spaces.
That's left, you know, if you reduce the size, then your parking would be an issue.
The
Well,
street, sure.
Focusing just back to the question of the potential impacts of this project in this specific question number 3 in the part 2. You're still moderate to the larger.
Yeah,
And
so
Mike is the same. So then, those are pretty significant types of conditions saying to an applicant, lose a whole story. You know, I think that it sounds like this project as presented, I mean, that's a fundamental alteration to the project. And so, the board can move forward with a positive declaration for the project I think that would be the outcome of this, and then that would put it back to the applicant to produce a full environmental impact statement, produce a type 1 form instead of a full environmental assessment form instead of the short form. And then I also don't know if you would ultimately, it wasn't on the agenda tonight, but this is, if your thoughts are that the project is presented won't, doesn't justify under seeker, I'm assuming that you would also agree it doesn't meet the site plan criteria for the village either. In which case, I guess I would ask whether the board is thinking of entertaining a motion to deny the project tonight. It wasn't on the agenda so specifically.
Could I ask a couple of questions before you have to take that leap? Is there a sense from the board as to what might feel like a mitigation to the height? Is 3 stories in any configuration something that doesn't appeal or doesn't feel consistent with some of the surrounding area? There can be different building architectural styles with 3 stories, but the one thing that we've tried to impress every time we've been here is we're trying to keep this residential character, and the architecture speaks to residential, right? This doesn't look like any commercial building you probably have anywhere in the village. So it speaks to making the facade, the colors, the textures, the fenestration, the roof, the peaks, all speak to residential. And I just would like to get some sense as to whether or not, aside from cutting out a floor, which you know the result, you know what's going to happen. You take out a whole floor of units.
Does it? I
It
mean,
kills the
It
project.
kills the project.
It does not work financially with that inferior unit. It kills it.
Yeah.
Now, we could take off the gable roof and have a flat roof. It will be 9 feet shorter, but it will have a very different look. But if the actual, numerical height is the issue rather than the visual style, then that's a possibility.
Remind me again how many units are going to be in that building?
31. So you lose essentially 10. You actually lose more than that because you've got administrative and management space on it and community space on it.
So if you did a flat, that's 9 feet, that would come off of it. What's the resultant height? Is it 40?
The 50, what do you say it was? 50 and a half minus 9 feet.
41.
Yeah.
41 and a half.
so that's gonna make it look good. It's gonna make it shorter, but it's not gonna have nearly. Now,
It won't.
now it's not
Now
gonna.
it's going to look like a commercial building.
Yeah, it's gonna, and it's in the residential area. So it takes off one box and lights up another one.
It also affects structural because it'll affect the snow load. It'll affect the leak potentials of the roof because flat roofs tend to leak more than peaked roofs. And to answer your question about the buildings on North Ave, the average building on North Ave is 45 feet tall.
There was a flat roof, is there a facade changes that you can do to make it appear more like the pizza table front of the, well, I guess the front of the sides to give it more of a traditional residential thing, but structural?
Rob, you want to speak to the?
Yeah, if the question could be repeated, I couldn't quite hear it.
If there's a flat roof, could you mimic the look of the peaked gables, whatever that's called, in some fashion, or, restyle the front or facade of the building to make it look a little more residential instead of making it a square, rectangle look?
Yeah, very often a false mansard is used to sort of to do that. So the third story looks like a steep sloped roof. It's a certain style of architecture that I doubt you have in the community. So it would be something we could look at. Certainly, if we cut the gables off, one of the arguments with the gables is that when you go to flat roof, we have to add a little bit of a parapet at the roof edge. So we have a 41-foot height, but the low edge of the eave right now is probably at 39 feet. And that's the edge that you would really read. Like once you're on the street, you're sort of reading the gutter line. The pitched roof is fading away. And of course you've got the gables, that pop up. And that 51 feet is to the highest point of the highest peak. And not all the peaks are that high. So if you were to take an average, it would be, a few feet lower than that. Yeah, we could certainly look at taking the third floor off and trying different architectural characters. We did internally look, at multiple iterations, and as design architects, we felt this was a direction that was most conducive to staying within character of the neighborhood, what the neighborhood is now in terms of gable form, and what the neighborhood may transform to as more and more buildings are replaced and brought off the ground and built in their sort of current form, but up 6 or 7 feet, from where they are.
So essentially, this building is 6 feet taller than the one we have.
Right, it's in the middle of a residential neighborhood.
But it's one street over from North Ave. So if you're looking at it from an environmental comparison,
Well, it's 2 streets over, something like that.
Also, we've also heard, I think that the architects have some potential ideas to reduce the height of the building from 50 and a half or 51, whatever it was, by possibly 9 feet. Now, that would be something that they'd have to bring back to the table, but if they were able to reduce it, to bring it that far down, is that something that the 3 members who have indicated a potential moderate to large impact would find as an acceptable mitigation for the, this is all in relation to question 3 here, comparing the character and quality of the existing community and the, I think, concern identified.
Height and size, I mean, the townhouses are just so much nicer. I mean, the townhouses are so much more fitting to the neighborhood. So how many units could you take out of this project?
And it's marginally working financially right now. It's right at the edge of not working right now.
And I know there was discussion earlier too about 14 versus 46, but are we taking into account any apartments, any multifamily units that were in those prior buildings? Just as it's not likely to be a significant number, but do you recall?
no, that's unacceptable. If you have a communication for the board, you communicate to all of us.
You've told me I can't address the board.
Right, but you're still managing to do it.
So that I just bring that up because I think they're, relative to what uses may have existed prior. 14 might not just be the easy answer because that's how many parcels you have. More units. Multifamily.
14 parcels, but I can't remember how the ones on Temple Street, the majority of those were 2 families. Possibly 3. The other properties, I'm not sure.
Okay. All right. So it's fair to say it was, if it was 14 units at one time, it could have been more than that. If there were multi. And I guess I would go back to my earlier question about what would make the board comfortable in terms of building height. Is there some magic number that, or is it 3 stories is just too hard to grasp?
I mean, for me, it's just this huge building in a residential neighborhood. Do you need to?
Yeah, so I've been asked if the site is actually zoned high-density mixed overlay, which is certainly always a valid question. And I think, I believe the code enforcement office and the village has reviewed all of this and certainly not indicated that the use variance is needed for this project. And certainly, I think the applicant is also under the impression that the overlay district has been overlaid on that.
It has.
Right, and I think that's something I'll follow up with you on, because certainly that's a fundamental question. I think that's not a question for the planning board to decide or halt necessarily anything right now. If me looking at this, I somehow think that this overlay district, in fact, was not overlaid on it, and there will be a lot of other discussions that go on, but I think it's all about you folks to do it.
Well, I agree that if they could bring down even the visual of the height, that would be more palatable, I think.
So then I guess I would ask the applicant if, hearing that this one board member who's currently a potential moderate to large impact and considering what types of mitigating conditions might be. Is that something that the applicant would consider going back to the drawing board, giving it some thought, letting the planning board know if you would entertain that, even if it's like a mock-up? That's what it could look like. Instead of the planning
Towel
board.
things and little tissue boxes or something.
And I'm asking if they consider that as a potential acceptable condition and propose it as an alternative type of plan. Not that you have to commit to it, but saying, here's what it could look like. We might be willing to do it. Or if you're not willing to do that, then the planning board would probably just continue down the path that's.
Yeah, of course, we're certainly willing to.
So will this require them to just submit a new site plan review, or do they have to go through the application process all over again?
I don't know, it would be an update just to the drawing. We need to resubmit everything. I mean, this is, again, and I guess the continued conversation is there anything else that the planning board thinks would be needed either to mitigate a potential environmental impact or on specific site plan, other criteria and qualities that are separate and apart from seeker? Because if they're going to go back to any drawing at all, let's try to get it all out there. If you think that anything can be done to improve the project or reduce or bring it into compliance with the road site.
Could you do pink with polka dots for the color?
You want purple?
Sure. No, then they'll say they'll put the character in the neighborhood again. Don't do that.
Oh, we've got a full palette. We've got all the colors already.
Maybe put a Ferris wheel in there.
I mean, if you ask for it, then you almost have to say it's in the character of the community. Not you have to say, "No, I don't vote it out."
I guess I appreciate all that's been said relative to the fork in the road. But I would certainly appreciate a sense of whether 3 stories is in and of itself going to be continued to be perceived as a moderate to large impact. So we could certainly come up with some alternatives that bring down the overall height as we have suggested tonight. But if we're spinning our wheels relative to still having 3 stories, if that's really the hurdle that we can't clear, I think we all appreciate knowing that. Now,
Have you done a height inventory on that street, the streets over, I mean, I know North Ave was mentioned as, what's the height of the building? Christine's mentioned it's possibly around 45 feet, but you guys.
The average is 45 feet.
Yeah, and so then it's worth knowing, okay, how's that average figured? Is there one really tall building and a bunch of short ones, or vice versa? But have you done a height inventory?
no. So if you thought that would be helpful to have, only caveat I would suggest is that please give us the benefit of the 6 feet. We have to comply with the flood damage prevention law and building code. So as we look at other architecture in the area, we need to be cognizant of the fact that they may or may not be consistent with building code and your local law for floodplain management. So we could certainly look at that, from a floor to floor perspective, and maybe from a first floor to a peak of roof perspective, but I would certainly want to emphasize that our extra 6 feet is a response to Mother Nature.
Because if you didn't have to build it up to put it above floodplain, it would be.
45 feet.
Right, but you gotta build it.
What's that?
I mean, it totally has to be built up.
We have.
Yeah, that would be insanity. Well, you can't build it up, not there because it's cold.
And I guess that's where, to your point about getting the benefit of that 6 feet, right? If without that 6 feet, it would be 45, and that's what the current roof. And if they're able to design it to take 9 feet off that, then it'd be 36 feet, which would presumably be a lot more visually consistent with the other properties. I'm assuming, not having done height inventory myself.
Well, and the
Who knows how tall
question
it
is, around that block, because that's where it sits in that block.
But again, for seeker purposes, you have to look at the overall community.
But-
not just that block.
But we're not just talking about that now. Or isn't this, at this point in time, sort of a broader discussion
Well,
of saying?
it's a
what
broader
else are-
discussion because we have to deal with question 3 on the seeker about the community character.
So it sounds like the applicant has asked a pretty straightforward question. And I guess I'm sure they would appreciate some sort of a verbal response from at least more than one member of the board. If it is 3 stories plus 6 feet, is there something about that the board feels just in light of everything can't be mitigated, is just too inconsistent with the character of the community, focusing on the neighborhood, the blocks around it, and then doing several levels of zoom on this project in relation to the community and the impacts of it?
So I'm going to dumb down the question. If they can lower the roof and come back to us with a new set of schematics with a lower roof, will the three of you that are looking at question 3 as a moderate to large reconsider your opinion? Is it worth it for them to go back and do the work, to make new drawings and come back to us with something else? Because
I would honestly say I'd have to see the drawings
Yeah.
before I can make that decision.
And I'm
I can't just
conflicted.
say, yeah,
I'm conflicted.
So, I mean, what you're saying, what it sounds like, possibly, yeah, you need to see it.
I'm not gonna say, yes, I'll change my mind until
No, but
I
I'm-
see what they come back with.
I'm not asking you to guarantee them that it'll be a yes. What I'm saying is, if they come back to us with new schematics and they've lowered the height of the roof, you'll actually consider it. You're not a permanent no.
There's nothing.
No, at this point, no, I'm not a permanent no, but I gotta see it. I gotta see the pictures, I gotta see the drawings, I gotta see
Oh, understood.
see what it
Yeah.
looks like.
But where I'm coming from too is that I've heard that the 2 stories, the other traditional townhouses seem to be a nice fit and I want to believe are happy with those.
Yeah.
So that's why I beg the question. We could certainly take a whole floor off and not have a project, but 2 stories works, but 3 is critical to
Three stuff.
perform.
And I don't know if this is feasible and if you could do it, but actually something that might help me. If there was any way you could take pictures of the properties around it, kind of, so I can see what it's gonna look like compared to the homes that are already there.
A little more 3D modeling.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I know, I'm in a position of,
But
we
maybe,
need
Well,
this, but it's something that you
I didn't know if it was possible.
Realize that if they lower the roof, they're still gonna be taller than the homes.
And I understand that.
But it's just to get the sense of that.
Want to get a sense of
Right.
what it's gonna look like when it's actually
And
there.
Yeah, I think trying to paraphrase some of that, right, it's the current proposal compared to what you have in your eye as the streetscape, it's just too stark of a difference.
Yeah.
So by bringing it down, it might still be a difference, but it's less of an immediate noticeable, gap between old and.
Just kind of want to see where everything sits and, I feel, imagine myself driving down the street and saying, oh, all right.
It's hard to
That was horrible,
Right, it's hard to visualize the 50-foot building and how big it is, and it is hard to visualize, so that would be very helpful.
okay.
Are there any other features in the projects? Because so I think where the planning board is kind of stalled out, not stalled out. The seeker discussion without making a decision on seeker. Now turning more to the site plan criteria. Is there anything else that you guys would like to see tweaked or modified? And remember, I know we had, aside from Georgia, the board has had multiple opportunities to look at this. I believe you provided feedback to them. They've already responded by modifying the plans. So I don't know if there's really anything else to add to it, but if there is, mention it, please.
So is height the last issue that they need to address then?
I think the only other thing that we weren't really provided information on was the amount of earth that was going out and the amount of earth that was coming in. And there was just that really nonlinear scale, but I mean, that was just a picture. So that's the only other thing that would be helpful to know the basis of your, this.
Okay.
Right, because there's a lot of assumptions of how much earth is going in, what's going in, what's coming out, all of the masses. Like, we haven't been privy to any of that data.
Okay. Based on the meeting we had many months ago, we had revisited our gradation because you brought up the fact that the colors they're non-linear, right? We
Yes,
had
we
that
did.
discussion, and so we went and polished that up, so that there, you could see.
Are there any, just like your volumetric calculations, that we're bringing in this many cubic feet of earth?
Yep.
We're taking out this many cubic feet, like we just haven't seen any of that.
Okay, well, I can tell you that based on those sections that we did provide, and the grading plan that's been done, and the volume of empty space that we're creating underneath the buildings, we're right now about 12 cubic yards under.
So you're removing, okay,
Yeah, 12 cubic yards is meaningless. I mean, it's within, it's not within the
so you're,
accuracy of the model, but
you're
we're holding zero.
you're holding zero.
I didn't see that paperwork. Oh, sorry, for that response.
Right.
Well, from that question from a previous meeting, I didn't see the paperwork come back with that paperwork response.
What you just said to me, she was asking if there's a written record of that.
Well, we made it in the last submission. It was in the materials that we had.
Okay, so we just have to dig, but I'll have to.
Yeah, it was back in October.
And this, you're gonna actually generate a report.
Yeah, we can develop more detail to explain this, yeah. But the one thing I know, when you place instruction in the cross section like that, it doesn't represent the flexibility of thinking. It's introduced as a single monolithic structure.
And is one section enough?
Yeah. It's going right through the site, going right through the longest building.
Okay.
And that's also, from an intuitive perspective, that is the foundation that is what you might consider being perpendicular to how the water comes up and how it recedes.
Is this what you're talking about?
Yeah.
The bill, like, when that was provided, they were asked to provide the numbers of the bill. And after that, they haven't come in yet, or they haven't been provided, the actual land mass numbers.
Oh, okay, all right, well, and the short answer is that it's zero.
But the documentation for that they asked for, none of that was provided.
Sure, we can.
Did you have any other questions or any other changes to the site plan that you think might be necessary or appropriate to mitigate anything and bring the project more into harmony with?
You now have it, the volumetric calculations.
That can be provided through the secretary and shared every member.
We can, anything that we've shared informally tonight, we'll document and cover it.
Yeah, not a lot. Yeah, so it's just numbers on a sheet of paper. There's not any explanation to them. But
Yeah.
it would be nice,
Yeah, and
right? It's just a table of numbers with any, because in this area, we have to do this and that is this. I mean,
sure, we can add some narrative that helps.
there's no narrative. So yeah, that's the good word. There's no narrative to this and there's no narrative to that. And that would be definitely helpful to have.
So do the board have any other concerns though that you feel need to be brought up or addressed that have not been already brought up, and remember, there's been multiple board meetings, and I don't want to rehash things that you've already said, here's what we'd like to see. Rehash it if you want to, that's on you guys.
I don't think I have anything else.
Thanks, nothing.
So my question to you is that with this hanging overhead, how do we review and go about the site plan if we're gonna have them change the roof? Now it's gonna be different.
You don't. You wait till the applicants indicated that they're going to propose an alternative roof line. And that, the board, I mean, you can have a discussion tonight if you want about what the preliminary approval could theoretically look like. But if this roof line issue, the height of the building issue is a sink or swim thing that the majority of the board wants to see a different rendering showing alternative design to get a sense of how that relates, I'd say, let's let the applicant do that. Tonight, I mean, effectively, the meeting minutes would read something to the effect of meeting held, whatever the first part was. And this discussion would be the board reviewed part 2 of the seeker, discussed proposed responses to them, identified a concern with question 3, requested that the applicant identify that height is a concern, asked the applicant to provide an alternative rendering showing a different height
Yeah,
for consideration.
height and just massive.
And then applicant, well,
Now you're in a different category. Now do you want them to reduce the size of the building as well? Because
and that's, and not, I know the architect also, whoa. I mean, because if it's not just the height, if it's the overall size of the building, that's okay. The board can make the decision, but it sounds like that's something that the applicant is not really contemplating being able to change for the project. And again, you don't need to necessarily make this a positive declaration under seeker to also just conclude, well, at the end of the day, the applicant is not changing the overall size of the building. The height might be coming down, but it's still however many units and all the other concerns that you have with the project, whatever they may be, and end up concluding that site plan should be denied for better to comply with the harmonious relationship criteria. And again, it's okay to be conflicted. One of the things that I like to have prepared if possible when the project is ultimately contentious is a well-reasoned decision in support of whatever way you guys are going. And if the majority of the board doesn't want to do anything tonight, that's okay. And you can consider, in more detail what your reasons are for either approving or denying a project or, responding to the seeker. And, we can work up a draft decision, whichever way the majority is intending to go.
Well, I think if we're asking them to now come back with different schematics so that we can review a lower roof, obviously we can't approve a site plan and it doesn't make sense to move forward on anything else if we haven't approved a site plan. So I think we need to give them the opportunity to return with the information that you're requesting.
Yeah, I think we will agree on that.
So, tabling?
Yeah, I know Rusty always catches me up on this, whether you need to table something or not. There's no action currently pending, no motions or anything. The matter is applied for. It's just like, okay, we've heard from the applicant. Applicant's agreed to provide this additional for an alternate withdrawing. Motion to adjourn
And
and
how does
the next
this affect-
meeting to be.
And this is gonna reset our 62-day clock
So
because we requested the information.
well, because the applicants indicated that they would provide this further information, yeah, I would say that your 62-day window is extended further by time. You know, I mean, I would ask the applicant when they think they can have this additional mock-up submitted so that the planning board could schedule a meeting. So it's like, the 62-day window that we've been talking about is the period of time in which the board has to make a decision after it's either when the public hearing is held or when the application is considered full and complete and submitted. And the applicant is like, this is it, guys. I'm not doing anything else here. Here's what it is. We're not giving you any more information. The applicant's indicating they're going to provide more information, so. I mean, the applicant could certainly say, no, I'm solved. We're not going to give you anything further. I've seen that happen.
So how long do you think it would be before you could get us the new site plan?
Here's a question for Rob. Rob, what are you thinking? How long will it take to work out some new elevations? And we want to have a streetscape that drops these elevations into the streetscape, the full variety of them that we come up with.
I would say offhand, it'll be more than a month. You know, it's significant amount of design work that we've gone through over the last year. So it's not easy, and we've got a full workload. And then to do the rendering is a different process. That's once we do the design work, to get it rendered into the streetscape will be another 2 to 3 weeks. So, you know, to get back to the board, I could say we can come back in a month, but I don't think we'll make it. And have
So
great
we
stuff.
have our meetings the last Tuesday of the month. So if we're looking at over a month, would the last Tuesday in April work?
Yeah, I think we could be able to hit that. Yeah.
Who agrees?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to make the dog barking in the background. Yeah, I think that could work.
Okay, so does that work for everybody if they're prepared for our April meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
I would ask that please email it to Meg and so that it can be disseminated to us about 2 weeks before the meeting, just so we have time to review. I know that Mike likes to take his time to review things thoroughly. So if you could get it to us, you know, somewhere around 2 weeks, week and a half, 2 weeks.
Do you want to set a hard deadline? Because I think that's one of the things that I know the planning and zoning boards have always found frustrating, not for your project necessarily, but other projects in the past, getting things sprung on them last minute or day of. And so,
Yes, yes.
April 26th would be our meeting. So
2 Fridays before that will be,
2 Fridays before that would be the 15th.
so if Mike, I'm picking on Mike because like I said, he's the one who needs the most time to review this stuff, but.
Well, I think we all do. I think we all do.
We all-
We have other things going on.
We all do. I just know that Mike has
Is it
specifically
6 days
mentioned to me. that he
beforehand?
wants 2 weeks to review.
Is that, I mean, that's not full 2 weeks.
Yeah,
It's
well, I was kind of going by this, I was gonna bring this up and go by this one that Jeff had given me from Tioga County's planning, where they wanted 12 days before their meeting. And I think 12 days is an adequate time to,
12 business days or just 12 regular days?
12 regular days.
Okay. So
Like
one,
the example they have here, their meeting date is the 15th of January, the due date is the 3rd of January.
so if we set a hard deadline for the 15th, if they got it to us by the 26th, the 26th would be the 11th day.
The meeting's on like,
It would be April 26th.
I will just.
and then at that time, you'll also write up the other things.
Yes,
Thank you.
so submit on the
No
And you
later
can-
than the 15th.
No later than the 15th.
Yes.
The 15th. was okay.
Yeah.
That's 2 Fridays.
Well, it's like, everybody works, everybody's got other things going on, and when you get that stuff 6 days before the meeting, it's kind of hard, especially when you're getting packets like this.
That's why I like to.
I really wasn't picking on you, Mike, it's just that I know you're the one that requested
Right,
it,
everybody
so.
picks on.
That's why I like 2 Fridays before a meeting, because then you get 2 weekends.
2 weekends,
Yeah.
that's good.
Okay.
Also, because you have to get an extra like 4 week to actually prepare.
We're gonna hold off on this then,
Yeah.
and not declare a positive declaration?
No declaration.
Okay. All right. So then, moving on,
But I just want to thank the board for being able to all come together tonight. It's been a hard winter.
It has. all right, hold on, we're not done as a board. Hold on. Mike's wanting things ahead of time, that's a decision we need to make as a board. Is that a motion we need to make, and then get to Meg and,
Oh, yeah, just in general. Yeah, I mean, I think, so you as a board can set your rules for procedure. And so if you're regular, I think it is more than appropriate for you to have a motion to require application materials to be turned in no later than, well,
Minimum
2 Fridays.
days.
2 Fridays.
2 Fridays.
Before the regular scheduled meeting. Otherwise, it would be fixed to the next.
meeting.
I, do you want me to make it?
Yeah, I would say.
We made the motion.
Yeah, so I make the motion that we require that all materials must be submitted at least
2 Fridays,
before the meeting,
or it will
to
be.
be considered in that meeting.
And then that-
And I'll.
Okay, I'm a yes,
Yes, on that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
that motion carried. Okay, adjourning, well, motion to adjourn the meeting at 8:58 PM.
Second.
Seconded by Mike Duvarney. All in agreement?
Yes.
Yes.
All in agreement, meeting adjourned.
Yeah.
Mike, you second that motion?
Yes. I'll heard it too. You want me to?
The only downside was the piece of scouring the minutes. On the back and the first of this. So you can confirm. So the. Oh, yeah. Well, particular. What I'm being told. So. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. I just remembered that. I walked.
Just second the motion.
Uh,